Hello, I'm Sarah. I'm a security architect at Versent. If you haven't heard of Versent, which you probably haven't, because we don't work in Europe yet, we're a AWS shop. We move things, we help people move things into the cloud, securely, obviously. And we also help people run things in AWS. I'm a security architect, so that's basically what I do. I'm going to click through most of these. I've also worked in Europe and New Zealand. I did used to live in London here, so it's nice to come back, albeit for 48 hours before I have to leave again, which is painful. So yeah, so I help people move stuff into the cloud securely. Usually when you move things into the cloud, hopefully, you're uplifting them, making them better. And I've worked in tech for about 9-ish. I'm going to change that in a couple of months to 10, because I think I'll be close enough to 10 years. And saying that you've spent a decade in tech sounds way better. So I overuse memes and GIFs or GIFs in my presentations. So sometimes they'll have something to do with the talk, sometimes they won't. I'm also a wannabe crazy bird lady and an alpaca enthusiast. If you bother to follow my Twitter, I'm just kind of obsessed with this Japanese fluffy alpaca called Alpacaso, which is clearly the best name ever for something. This is, if it's going to click, have I moved too far away? I really want like a really cool bird, but I can't have one because I travel too much. So yeah, that's my crazy bird lady wannabe thing. Also, I've got a really common first and a really common first and last name. So if you Google me, please Google me with caution. I'm not a Christian author. I found this book in Hawaii though, so I had to get my selfie with it. There's millions of Sarah Youngs in the world, but I'm also, most importantly, not a 1980s porn star. So and I'm not making that up, so just Google with caution. Though quite obsessively, sarahyoung.com domain seems to be up for sale, and that's been around since I was about 14, and I'm quite upset. I wanted to buy it, but it's too expensive. Anywho, also, I like to do something topical in my talks. So my public service announcement this morning is BA got hacked, they got hacked a couple of days ago. If you've bought tickets in the last, they haven't specified the period of time yet. Apparently they'll have your credit card numbers and your CCV and the lot. BA are supposed to be telling people, and I hear that this morning they took an ad out in some of the papers, but you should probably change your password and keep an eye on your credit cards if you've bought tickets with BA recently. So there's my nice topical trying to make security relevant to everyone thing for this talk. So, on to my talk. This is my contribution to this meme that was going around a couple of months ago. It's kind of borderline now not appropriate because it's probably out of date, but I got more likes and retweets than I've ever done on Twitter before. I don't have that many followers though, so yeah. I was pretty pleased with that. So going on to what I'm going to talk about today, I'm just going to click. I've gone off having blum. I need to do whole pages. I'm going to talk about security threat modeling. Now, I think most of the people in this room are more developers than pure security people, and you've probably heard of that phrase before. It does, and most of you will be rolling your eyes thinking, oh my God, that sounds like a horrific paper-based exercise. And guess what? It is. So, but it is quite important, and I'm going to try and justify to you why paper-based exercises like that are actually quite important. Obviously, we're at container camp, so I'm going to talk about it in the context of containers, but you can apply this to pretty much every system. Also, then we're going to look at the key security threats to containers and have a quick overview of some container-specific security tools that you might want to use. I'm not going to do loads because I only have half an hour and there's lots out there now, but it's just to give you an idea so you can go away and investigate for yourself. So recapping threat modeling, if you've heard of it before, it's, like I said, you've probably heard your security people, possibly your auditors and people like that talk about it. It sounds quite cool in theory. There's lots of different methodologies out there. There's DREAD, Strike, Pasta, Trike. I don't know why I've started saying pasta instead of pasta. Don't know. It's probably living abroad. I thought this was a nice hark back to the Hawaii threat that went on a while ago where they messaged everyone to say North Korea was firing on them. The ones that are more well-known there are DREAD and Stride. Stride is the Microsoft one. OWASP as well is the Open Web Application Security Project. You may know them better if you do web app development from the OWASP Top 10. I'd personally never heard of Trike or Pasta, but I found them on Wikipedia, so they must be real. So I just thought I'd add them up there. So I also think that sometimes people just think of the word they want to use and then find words to fit, but hey. So I'm going to quickly, I say recap, it may be new to you, just talk about the definitions of threat modeling. You'll have definitely heard these words before, but I find that security people and other people use them incorrectly, and I too am guilty. So just a quick recap that I've stolen from Microsoft because their definition was nice. An asset is something that's valuable. You almost always were talking about data, but you can talk about it in a broader sense, like a system or a database. A threat is something that's maybe malicious that might damage your system. Doesn't have to be malicious though. So we obviously think when we think a threat, oh, it's a hacker, oh, it's state-sponsored terrorists or whatever. But in fact, a threat can be a noob who presses delete on your database or raises your backups. Like that's also a threat. They just haven't meant to do it. Vulnerability is a weakness in your system that could exist at any level, and that can make a threat possible. And an attack, which is the one we all know, is an action taken by something that might harm an asset. So it may exploit a vulnerability, it may not, it depends. And a countermeasure is something that addresses your threat and mitigates your risk. And there's the link to that very nice description. I think it's one of the best, most concise ones I've read on the Microsoft Developer Network. And I realize you're all thinking, oh my God, please get onto less technical, audity stuff. I swear we're getting there. This fits into what I call the security circle of life. Now, I realize in the middle there it says circle of risk. So sorry, I was going to change it, but I did steal this off the internet. But just going back through these, I'm going to try and remember where the laser is. Excellent. So our assets will get compromised by threats. Threats materialize via attacks. Attacks exploit vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities expose you to risks. Risks are mitigated by countermeasures, and countermeasures protects our assets. So we go around and around and around and around. It's important to demonstrate this as a circle. Sometimes I've seen it as a line, which I find very confusing because this is a never-ending process. It goes on again and again and again. We need to be doing this constantly because the threat landscape always changes. And as I will show you, why should you use threat modeling with containers specifically? Well, I write this, and I keep meaning to change this on the slide because actually nothing is secure, and you should be using threat modeling with everything, but I'll be telling you that like as a security person, clearly. Your threat landscape changes constantly. Like, it's always changing. Like last year we had WannaCry. There's, CVEs, if you're familiar with the vulnerability list, new vulnerabilities are found every day. So this is going to change. If your environment's secure one day, it's not going to be necessarily secure the next. So you need to keep looking at this reasonably regularly. Your environment's unique. Even if your environment is a copy of someone else's environment, like I guarantee you it will not be absolutely 100% the same. So you need to look at this for your environment. And it's a very structured way of analyzing controls to be implemented. And it helps you communicate to your non-technical stakeholders. Now, the fact is that non-technical stakeholders often hold purse strings, and you need to justify why you need to pay for things. This is particularly relevant from a security context because we all know that when security is working well, you don't see anything. Everything works fine, and sort of your higher up stakeholder people don't really see any real benefit because everything's working fine and you haven't been breached. It's only when bad things happen that people start asking questions about why security isn't working and why didn't we pay for it. So a good example of an ever-changing threat is the lovely Kim Jong-un. I believe at the moment the West, are we kind of friends with him? Are we not? I don't actually know. But I'd argue maybe he's a more consistent threat. But, we've been going through we're friends with him, we're not type thing. I was considering changing this to make it more. Last time I did this talk in Australia, if you know anything about Australian politics, we've had 8 prime ministers in 7 years. So I did change that to the changing prime ministers. And I was considering, especially for London, to do Brexit. But I feel like I haven't followed it enough to make it too relevant. And I'm not actually sure where we're at with that. So thought I'd leave it with Kim. So threat modeling for containers. Traditional applications are obviously different to virtual machines and containers. What I have seen a lot in real life is that people take their virtual machine threat modeling, this is if you've done any threat modeling, and they just go, basically containers exactly the same. Now it's true, there isn't big overlap, but there are differences between them. And so that's what we're going to look at. And then we'll look at some tools I have got to change how these bullet points come off these slides. Just a quick recap. This is a very nice diagram that I stole from a NIST document. If you're not familiar with NIST, it's the National Institute of Standards or Science and Technology, I forget. It's a US government department. They publish a lot of papers on various different technological things. And some of them are very inaccessible, but the one they have about container hardening is actually very good. And I'm going to link to it at the end of the talk if you want to have a read of it. It's only about 10 pages long, so it's not a terribly long read. Just to recap this, I'm not going to label it because I'm sure everyone in here understands the difference. We have VMs, containers on bare metal, and containers on VMs. Just keep this in mind because we're going to come back to it at the end. So your top threats to containerized environments. Plenty of people have alluded to some of these already today. So we've got your container image, your orchestrator, registry, the host OS, and runtime environment. Probably nothing groundbreaking there that you haven't heard of before, so fair enough. So looking at some tools that you can use to counter some of these threats. I know, again, I realize I've been kind of bashing auditors all day and for most of this talk anyway, and now I go on to an audit tool, which is Docker Bench Security. It comes with Docker. What it does is it assesses your containers against the CIS or CIS. If you don't know what that stands for, it's Center for Internet Security, 1.6 benchmark. Basically, it's going to help you build your security baseline. It's not going to tell you that your container and your environment's totally secure. What it does is it's telling you where you deviate from what is recommended best practice. Now, I like to think of myself as a fairly pragmatic security person. We can have best practices and guidelines and standards, but in the real world, not everyone can align to them because of compatibility, legacy equipment, whatever. But it is really important to understand where you don't meet those guidelines. So that's what this is really, really helpful for, and get that documented. And I know you're rolling your eyes at documentation, but you guys can probably kind of push it onto security because it may need to go on a tech debt register or a risk register or something. Because a lot of security breaches, the sad fact is, they come from people not understanding what was wrong in their environment. Sometimes attackers exploit vulnerabilities that people over time, when you've had staff turnover, they've forgotten they're there. So this stuff needs to be written down, and you need to understand where you don't match up to best practice. Another one, promise this is the last audit thing, is OpenSCAP. OpenSCAP isn't a Docker-specific tool or container-specific tool, so you may well have heard of it before. It's open source. It's pretty useful for when you're in a regulated environment, so like financial services or government organizations. It will assess against a couple of different standards. It's got PCI DSS, which is credit card processing. FISMA is a US government data processing standard. And STIG is a US Department of Defense configuration baseline again. If you've ever used STIGs or ever had the misfortune to have to do it manually, at least on Windows machines, it basically involves checking about 500 registry values, which I can tell you as someone who's done that manually, makes you want to lose the will to live. OSCAP Docker is specially written for containers to do this, and it's pretty helpful again for getting your baseline documented, understanding where you do and don't meet standards. And even if you're not in a very regulated industry, it doesn't hurt to try and align with some of these best practices if you do data processing, handle credit cards, etc. So runtime security for your runtime security threat is SELinux. Again, SELinux is not a container-specific tool, and you may well have already used it. It's a Linux kernel security module. It adds additional access control and security policies. It has enforce mode, and it also does monitoring. It's got a bit of a bad rep for being quite difficult to use, but I think in the last 4 or 5 years, actually, it's become quite easy to use. But as long as you're trying to not configure custom policies, then it can get a little bit tricky. One of the things I'm going to say a couple of times before I finish is it needs to be monitored. So a lot of people buy security tools, they put them in, and they're like, sweet, I don't need to do anything with them because it's going to block all of our attacks. No, you need to monitor the output that you get from these tools. Because even if SELinux is blocking and it's stopping things from launching, which is great, if you've got an APT, which again, if you're not familiar with this acronym, is Advanced Persistent Threat, someone who's sat in your system or your environment for a long time, doing some reconnaissance, just scouting things out, this kind of output is where you might actually catch them. So it may be that you need to plug it into an existing monitoring thing that you've got. You might be able to kind of push it on an operations people. And how regularly you monitor it would very much depend on your organization. But please, please, if you do things like this, please monitor them. Don't just chuck it in and never look at it. Yeah, there are some other tools out there as well. AppArmor and AquaSec. I know Claudia earlier spoke about AppArmor. Hello, AquaSec. I'm name dropping everyone because I'm not trying to big up anyone in particular. I'm just trying to go through a few of them. So if anyone wants to pay me commission, though, feel free. So container image security. I'm going to talk about Notary. I'm just going to say before this starts, if there is one security control, one thing you invest in, please make it your image security. This is like, there's no point doing the rest of them if you're not doing this. It's an image, when we talk about image security, we mean an image repository where we use something that digitally signs your images so you can verify where the image is coming from and you can verify it's a good image. Notary is the one I picked to talk about here. They're all kind of a variation on a theme, to be fair. There's also Claire, and I believe there are now some other products, binary authorization for Kubernetes that I'm going to talk about in a minute, also does an image repository and signs things. But if you're pushing bad container images into your environment, like it's already game over. Like it doesn't matter if you have your SELinux and your monitoring and blah, blah, blah. Like if you're doing bad images, it's just I realize this should probably be the first slide I talk about, but please make this, if you pick one thing, make it this, please. So for your heuristics or IDS, that's intrusion detection system, there's Sysdig Falco. And hello, Sysdig, I know you're here as well. So shout out to Sysdig. It's based on just Sysdig, which again, you may have used. It detects anomalous activities within containers. It's got a lot of default rules, so at least initially, you don't need to do too much configuration. And again, I have not got this as a bullet point, but, I won't put that up yet, as I haven't got this as a bullet point, but please, if you're going to use an intrusion detection system, you need to have someone looking at the logs that it generates, because if it's telling you there's an intruder, but no one looks at it, there ain't no point having it. And it may seem like really obvious, but I have seen lots of companies spend a lot of money on these sort of tools, but then no one looks at them. So there's like basically no point. Yeah. Silence, I know. Like, you wouldn't believe that people do that, but genuinely, it's really common. I know I shouldn't put another one of these up, and this isn't mine, but I thought this was hilarious, and it was IDS, so, cool. And then, okay, Orchestrator and control channel security. I realize Kubernetes is not a security product in itself. It is an orchestrator. But a couple of good configuration guidelines here, which is use AppArmor, use SELinux, which we've already talked about. Don't run your containers as root. As we know from Claudia's talk, it's not always that simple, and I do realize that. I've not seen very many people who genuinely can run as root, but if for some reason you've managed to do something that can, please do. Get rid of your privilege escalation, use a read-only file system. Also, there's Rancher out there. Again, I know Rancher is not a security tool in itself, but it does have Orchestrator security features that you can use. I just loved, you see, hardening is important, so we can bash, so people can bash you. This is important. Another quick one that I slipped in at the end here is binary authorization for Kubernetes. So this just came out in beta very recently, in about the last month, I think. It's got a suite of Kubernetes security tools. It will sign your pods, it does image whitelisting, and it integrates with your CI and CD pipeline, but a lot further down. And if I just use this nice GIF that I stole from Google, as you can see, it actually checks literally just before it gets pushed. So it's actually, compared with the vulnerability scanners, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, it's actually just at the very last minute. So in theory, no one should be able to push anything dodgy before binary authorization checks it. Like I said, it's only in beta. It only came out about a month ago. It's based on, obviously, Google's internal technology they've been using a while. So you should go check it out, see if it's any good. And then finally, vulnerability scanning. I've got Tenable here. Tenable bought a company called Flawcheck, but now they're marketing it as Tenable Container Security. So you may see both names bandied about. Again, it's a vulnerability scanner, nothing new. We know from like Qualys and Tenable of the past, like, you'll have all seen application and web scanners, but those old school ones are not suitable for containers. They really won't pick up the right vulnerabilities. So you need to be using a container-specific one. It does integrate into your CI and CD pipeline, but as I said before, it's kind of up here in test, so a little bit earlier on. It can also scan your orchestrator, and there are a lot of other ones out there. So you've got Twistlock, hello, you're here, Aquasec, hi, and Trend Micro. I don't know if you're here, but hello if you are. And yeah, so there's plenty out there. I'm not sort of saying one is necessarily better than another. So where do these tools fit into container architecture? I thought this would be a really illuminating diagram, and I don't know why I continue to leave it in my talk, because as you can see, it doesn't really. We've got Tenable, the vulnerability scanners, and most stuff sits within the container. SELinux debatably kind of sits a little bit lower down in the OS, and then you've got Kubernetes, and Notary sort of, or your container image repository sort of floats in the ether here. I'm sure most of you, I'm not going to insult your intelligence that you could probably work that out yourself, but just in case you hadn't, there it is spelled out for you. So even more tools, and what do we want to do for the future? So there's loads of tools here. I've gone through at speed, I know, several different types of tools. I've just picked a few from different categories, but I've also given the shout outs to other people. Like, I've personally admitted most of the commercial tools here because I didn't want to pay for them. Also, bear in mind, though, the commercial tools, if you go and have a chat with commercial organizations, they will normally happily come in and give you a demo, give you a trial license so you can play around with it. I know they will. So, go and have a look at what's going to work best for you. And what's best for your mate down the road is not necessarily best for you. So you should use your threat modeling to help you work out what are the biggest threats to your environment, and then you can bring in different products and work out which ones fit your organization best. It's going to depend on so many different factors: budget, skill set, et cetera, et cetera. So you've really got to look at it yourself. And as we move more into DevOps and the shift to the left, and in theory, dev teams and security teams should be working a lot closer, leverage your security team to help you out with this, because that's what they're good at. They can help you do that threat modeling and then work out which tools might be best for your organization. Like, it's just, and I know that different organizations will have different amounts of time to be able to do this, but it's really important to try and benchmark and work out what's good and what's going to work for you. So work with your security teams. I know it's cheesy, and I know that depending on the organization, some security teams aren't super collaborative, but, try and do it as best you can, because with the shift to the left, it's happening anyway, whether you like it or not. So, because we don't want this. We don't want the fail whale. I know it's a Twitter thing, but, Docker whale, I had to put it up there. We want this, my favorite bit of mistranslated late 80s video game stuff. We want winners. And this is a list of the useful documents and links. In particular, like I said, please read the NIST special publication about container hardening. It's not very long, and it's nice and accessible, so do read it. There's a really good talk as well on container security by Scott Coulton of Puppet in Sydney, who was supposed to be here talking with me and had to pull out last minute. So please go watch his talk instead. I know he's gutted that he wasn't able to make it. I've kind of insulted your intelligence a bit by Googling all of these, the products here, which I'm sure you can look up yourself. But down the bottom here, I've got an OWASP threat modeling tool and a Microsoft threat modeling tool. So just to get a feel for it, or if you don't have any security people you can get to do for it, you can put in a few variables and it will spit out like a very basic threat modeling thing. Thanks very much. And if you've got any questions, let me know.